Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Millennials in Print podcast. I am again Alex Krupski, joined by my co-host, Jake Hoffman. Today, we have a special episode, a 2-for-1 special. As a matter of fact, we have Tim Curtis and Erik Martinez on the show today. Tim is the president and CEO of CohereOne, and Erik Martinez is the executive vice president over at Blue Tangerine Solutions. And together they host the Digital Velocity podcast, which Jake and I were on pretty recently. Guys, I don't want to take too much away from you. We kind of dive in right away with background and all that sort of stuff. Whoever wants to go first, would love to hear more about the background for our audience and kind of how you got into where you're at right now. And thanks for joining the show.
Not it. Go, Tim.
Yeah, not it. Okay, sorry. All right, I'll do it. So interesting, I actually, going back all the way to high school, I took an aptitude test that when the aptitude test came back, I was exactly 50% left brain, 50% right brain. And I remember the the counselors that were giving the test when we went in for our individual one-on-one, they said, well, you don't really fit into any category, except there's this category here called direct marketing. Do you know anything about it? And so that was my initial entree into direct marketing. I took a look at it, decided I wanted to be a marketing major when I got to college, and really dove headfirst into marketing. I graduated with a degree in international marketing, started working in global marketing and ran country operations at a few different countries. Came back, was in some pretty high roles for a direct marketer. I was actually over both digital and direct marketing. So I didn't know that you're supposed to pick one or the other. So I actually did both, which I've done throughout my career. And, over the course of time between agency side and client side, I was recruited to come to CohereOne. And that was 6-7 years ago now. So I've been at CohereOne. We've just been steadily growing ever since, and got good days. We're really enjoying the growth and what the future looks like for us. So that's kind of my journey.
Yeah, and for me, I actually got started in direct marketing as an intern in college. So I got this great internship right out of high school with a company called CohereOne that is still based in Colorado Springs, and did 5 summers of internship with them, and then graduated right into the 1993. Yes, I'm dating myself. 1993 recession. And when that happened, I had to find a job, and got lucky. And one of the people I'd worked for at CohereOne had moved on to a company up in upstate New York, and got my first direct marketing job for a little catalog direct-to-consumer business that was doing, print address labels and things like that through the mail. Very quickly kind of moved on into another role with a company called Direct Marketing Technology. So for those of you that are longtime catalog people, you might remember Direct Marketing Technology, but they were kind of the hot service bureau back in the 90s, and learned a lot about data processing and house file cleanup and all that great stuff. Then got an opportunity to work for a cataloger down in Florida, and that was back in the days where putting 80 million books in the mail wasn't a big deal. So spent some time doing that, and then moved on to another catalog in the Chicago region, which is actually where I started my digital marketing career as well. I ran their circulation program and started digital marketing, and that's kind of how I've gotten to where I was. So about 10 years ago, I struck out on my own with some help of a consultant friend, and built my own little direct marketing, digital marketing agency. And today I'm the co-owner and executive vice president for Blue Tangerine. And it's been a very interesting journey. Met Tim about, 8-9 years ago now.
Oh, wow.
as co-client. He was a client of mine, and we worked together. So we've had a lot of fun and stress all along the way in this journey. So got a lot of direct mail experience going back a long time.
So it sounds like Tim is one of very few people on the planet that actually followed their aptitude tests.
I am. I'm like direct ahead. I created a spreadsheet that afternoon of classes I was taking. So
yeah, I'm pretty sure mine was like a garbage man was like my number one pick. So
that's awesome.
Isn't it funny how you end up in marketing though? I mean, for me, it
all
was
roads.
like, yeah. For me, it was like I met a woman whose son worked for Red Bull, and I'm like, oh, marketing sounds cool. I was like in 8th grade, and it was just from there,
From there, yeah.
Typically, if you're marketing, it's usually like a Red Bull type of scenario. That's where most marketers get their start. Well, one of the things that's obviously interesting listening to you guys' background is it seems like you've always kind of had this like combination a little bit, right? So there's been this like, you got this direct in terms of like a printed piece, catalog, circ planning, things like that, and this digital piece, right? Which is really now sort of, I would say in the last couple of years has been, that's what everyone's doing, right? And it used to be, okay, there's digital versus print, and now it seems like those have kind of aligned. So you guys are kind of ahead of the curve on that trend, at least.
Just fortunately, I mean, I think we didn't. It all sort of happened organically. I mean, I actually also worked in creative. And so I really had a chance to leverage, both sides of the brain. And, at the time, if you really think about going back 15 years, things were siloed, but in the early days, it was kind of an all hands on deck. Everybody was doing everything. And I just decided to keep doing that.
Yeah, I think for me, it was, I always stuck to the data side. I really like numbers. I really like pushing bits and bytes around. And I'm not the creative one like Tim is, but that digital marketing was kind of just an evolution out of that technical background of moving data around is really how, the first websites got built. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because standalone databases that your website, the web page up, and I was kind of sitting at the very beginning of that when I had a guy coding in his basement to build our first website. So that's kind of how I got into the digital side, because we built our first website, and then we're like, hey, let's try email marketing. And you like pulled a list and put it in your Outlook and hope to God that some of it would get through. Right. This is like the very first email campaign. Like, let's do an email campaign. How many do we have? 20,000. Okay. Drop it in the Outlook. And I was like, oh, 20,000 emails in a regular Outlook in 2001 took like 20 hours to process. So it was that kind of thing.
Yeah, you guys have really, and just hearing about your background and seeing kind of both your LinkedIn profiles, you've both really ran the gamut of available jobs and positions in the marketing world. I mean, you both have the direct mail experience and digital, just like Jake talked about. Is it more just following trends a little bit, or how did it just happen naturally? I mean, how did you get into all that?
So this is my personal opinion, right? In my humble opinion, I've never felt like you could do marketing justice if you couldn't do either side. Because marketing is interrelated in ways, including the creative, in ways that we really can't always anticipate. And it's an art and a science. And so if you don't understand the interaction, interplay between the different channels, how a consumer may move between channels, you may discover something, for example, on Instagram, and then lead you to the website. You could buy totally within social commerce. You could buy within TikTok. You could buy within Instagram. I know I have. So for me, if you don't understand the interoperability and the interplay between all those, you're never going to get to a point where you're going to be able to fully tackle issues like attribution or lifetime value, because you simply don't know. And so for me, I had to have mastery over those issues, so that I could understand what was happening. So it really, for me, was driven nothing more than it was an unknown and I had to know it. That's how I ended up there. No grand scheme or anything like that.
Yeah, I don't think I had a grand scheme either, but it was kind of like all this stuff was evolving and stuff needed to get done. The world was changing. It was changing very rapidly, right? It was about 2005, 2006 that, catalogs, the internet back then, right? What we call e-commerce today. The internet back then was just starting to make forays into the marketing side, right? Google had launched its ad platform. Social media was at the very, very beginning, right? And you're suddenly able to drive sales through channels other than your direct mail. I grew up in a direct mail business, right? Mm-hmm. There was no broadcast TV or broadcast radio. There was none of that big stuff, right? The catalog was the main driver. So all of a sudden we had the ability to like drive leads through paid search, and we had the ability to do retention with our email marketing programs. And so for me, it was more of like, this is the next thing. And it was all connected to the data, right? We all were connecting to our house files. And I think, Tim, you work with a lot more of these internet pure plays who they understand their data is really, really important, but they didn't necessarily have that vision of what that house file meant and being able to control it in the earlier days. I think today it's a very, very different world. Everybody kind of understands the value of that customer file and how powerful it can be when you have information about those customers and you're able to use that information to build a campaign, target them, meet their needs, and meet them where they are.
I think what you guys both just talked about, the interoperability, is such an interesting talking point, because from my perspective, again, this is before I was in the industry, but it seemed like recession hits, social media is blowing up, direct mail and catalog space in general took a defensive stance saying, no, it's direct mail versus digital, right? Still more effective, all this stuff. Versus now, I think the conversation is, well, it's another arrow in the quiver. It's another channel to be on to kind of hit your ideal customer base. So do you guys see that kind of same evolution, I guess, in the thinking between those two thoughts?
It's gotten better. And I think if you go back and you look at, digital marketing and traditional direct mail catalog, direct marketing, I think early on the framework between the two sides was really established by the sales reps from both entities. And so you had SaaS, software salespeople going after the, what we would call the, sort of the okay boomer aspect of print. And it was this, it was slow, it was cumbersome, it wasn't exact, blah, blah, blah. And you had printer sales folks who then reacted to them. And so it became an us versus them. Whereas if you go back and you take a look at the brands and people sitting in the brand seats, yes, at the early days, everything was, fairies and unicorns, and digital was going to solve all of our issues, right? There was no congestion, there was no noise with digital. The world was our oyster. Well, the reality is that wasn't the case. The reality is neurologically, our brains form defense mechanisms to prevent us from being overwhelmed by digital stimuli. That shut down efficacy to a great deal on particularly the ad space. Became much harder to get a click. At the same time, you had the direct mail side that wasn't always as sophisticated as it could be, and was at times wielding more of a blunt instrument rather than the precision of a scalpel. And so we got into this where it was back and forth. And I think the the informed set of chief marketing officers and senior vice presidents of marketing began to recognize that, you know what, when we start testing this out, one depends on the other. When you start to pull direct mail out, the halo effect of that is the digital comes down. And in some cases, some aspects of digital that are very, very costly come down. We've seen it as high as 72% drop when print is pulled out of the equation. I have looked venture capitalists and angels in the face to say, if you do this, if you make these wholesale changes to your media mix without testing this, it will manifest itself in ways both undesirable and unpleasant. And in 3 instances, they closed. They went ahead with it and closed because the impact was so massive, they couldn't turn it out. They lost hundreds of millions of dollars of their fund money. The fund will carry on, but man, that is a black eye. And it was all unnecessarily, needlessly set up because it was sales reps from both sides that were trying to position themselves for share of wallet. When in the end, the brand needed both, but they needed to understand how to balance and leverage both to be effective. And so I continue to argue that we've got to get out of that mindset. I tell every client, we come in now with our clients, and a lot of them in a chief marketing officer type role. And I don't pitch digital this side. I'm a digital guy. I don't pitch digital side, but I know how far I can run with it and where that drop off is. And when you have that knowledge, then you can make it a much more amicable relationship between the two sides.
Erik, anything to add to that? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, I'm approaching it with our clients a little bit differently, and only from a standpoint that I have some clients who are historical, long-time catalog, and the good news is they believe in the medium. What they don't know is how much do we really need. And so we've been doing a lot of testing and figuring out, hey, do I need as much as I once did? Do I need as many pages? Do I need as many contacts? Where is that line that I can show you, like, hey, we can redeploy some of your money to invest in new growth initiatives while not hurting the overall brand. And that's the key. I think what Tim's alluding to is that there are some businesses and there's some big names that just stopped mailing their catalogs, and they took an immediate plummet, and they're going, what? Right? But if you do it really scientifically, and you take your time and you're patient, and you understand what those lifts are, then you can find an exact role. And that role is going to continue to evolve. I think the thing that's really hard today is, I know on the circulation side, not saying this is true today, but it was once true, that a lot of people tried to automate their circulation. I'm always going to mail my 24-month house file, and then I'm going to reactivate my 36 to 48-month buyers with a special piece every other mailing, right? And that's what we did. And there was no room for, well, how does that model need to change to meet today's needs, right? And I believe in a little more of a fluid circulation approach, where you're analyzing your results as you're going along and saying, okay, this is what I need to do. Now, if I have got a campaign, okay, I may put some rules in around that campaign because I have specific objectives, but then I'm going to analyze it and look at it and go, did that work? And making another adjustment. And I think today more and more people are doing that. But the implication is there's a lot more data processing. There's a lot more analysis that has to go on. There's a lot more data that you have to bring in from the outside to look at how's the digital influencing some of that activity as well. So I think it's a lot more complicated than it used to be. But then that effect is you can get your clients into a really good spot. You can get your mailers into a really good spot where they're mailing effectively, and they're using whatever funds that they might be saving towards other growth initiatives.
This is such an important conversation. I'm like trying not to add anything because I this is just so important. One thing I did want to maybe talk about a little bit, Tim, and it kind of came from you. Do you think part of potentially the challenge, or when you're talking about the sales influence, right, on sort of the process, and you look at what you would typically consider a direct mail salesperson, right? I think we might have the same sort of vision of who that person is.
They probably do.
Do you think that is going to be changing here if the next 5-7 years, with a lot of potentially more, I would say, people being put in sales positions that have more of a background either in the digital side, that have maybe a more robust marketing knowledge, right? So a lot of what I would say the traditional salesperson looks like, and this is true of our organization too, they're not super, like, they're not coming in with a marketing background, right?
Right.
And so for them, I think it's a little bit of a scary unknown. Hey, if we start talking about digital, well, all of a sudden, we're not making what we're making, right? Or, things like that. So do you kind of foresee that as potentially resolving some of it?
Interesting. In the last 2 weeks, I mentioned to you guys, I was at the Imaging Network Group conference last week in Tucson. And so I was speaking, and I remember just kind of randomly, and I had mentioned something in passing, and it was talking about direct mail and some of these channels. And I said something about the impact of direct mail and what happens when you mail or don't mail. And I started giving some percentages in terms of drop, or, when you pull direct mail out versus adding it. And this room, and primarily it was sales executives and CEOs, but they all of a sudden, these heads all went down and they were scribbling or they were typing. And I was like, okay, like I need to stop here for a second.
Yeah.
And then I started to go on, and one guy was like, hold on, wait up, go back, say that again. Out of just a couple sentences, what I'm finding is I am being pulled in by different printers all around the country, and actually internationally as well, to go in and speak to their sales team in terms of the training. And part of it is to attack some of these very, very, very deep issues. We set up our sales teams, oftentimes with incentivization to, grab that share of wallet. The challenge is when we set up those systems that they're great, they work, it's necessary for the business, but it creates that conflict because they're fighting for share of wallet. And so there's not really an impetus for them to understand the digital side. So we can be bringing them in with a little more experience, but as long as we're incentivizing them to grab that share of wallet, and it is a share of wallet conversation. I'm not going to argue, 100%. There's a marketing budget. It has to be split. Right.
Yeah.
So the more that we get a chance to go out and speak to these sales teams, and they're, I'm agnostic, right, on printers. I'll speak to anybody, and they're bringing me in all over the place. I also chair a privacy committee in Washington, D.C. for the ACMA. So we're shaping federal privacy legislation. We're keeping our pulse on everything that's happening with all the states. And that just general knowledge combined with the knowledge of the digital side, that training aspect for these salespeople will probably be more impactful than bringing in a general bit of knowledge about digital from a previous work experience.
Sure.
But we are going to have to work harder. And I know a lot of printers are trying to add some service sets where they're maybe bringing in a little bit of a digital component, to sort of splash things up. I don't know that that's necessarily
I don't think that's the right
super well for people, but it's sort of the appearance of, hey, we're agnostic, media agnostic, but we'll see.
All right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right.
It'd be like an SEO company buying a digital press.
Run it.
What's wrong with that?
Yeah.
What's wrong with that, Alex?
There goes Erik's business plan. Way to go, Al.
Yeah, exactly.
Ruined.
Well, and one of the things, interestingly enough, too, that Erik was kind of talking about when it comes down to, where you were saying, okay, they're trying to automate it, right? Like, we're going to do this. We're going to mail a 36-month file. It's going to go great. Quarterly, we're going to mail our 20, where it's just programmatic. And what's interesting is I feel like I look at a sales opportunity differently and say, so someone will come in and say, we're going to drop 300,000 in the mail. Right. And you go to their customer file and you're like, okay, well, there's about 50,000 that names that you could, whatever, however the math shakes out. How I've always looked at it is the more successful that we can make them, right, in the short term. So getting them at the right starting point with the right mix, with the right kind of way to understand their attribution with their digital channels, that's going to make them inherently more successful and valuable in the long term, right? Because I think a lot of times what happens, and it's, again, going back to your share of wallet conversation, if I can sell someone 500,000 catalogs tomorrow, it doesn't always behoove someone to think about it. Well, I'll just do that. And then they'll do it one time and then they'll never do print again because they didn't get the results that they wanted. And, then it's just kind of a domino effect. And then you got to fill that with the next one. Or how I think I try to look at it is, okay, what if I take a customer, grow them strategically over time, and all of a sudden they are at 500,000, but they're able to sustain it, and there's LTV and that whole other component then comes into it.
Think about it, Jake. If you're talking, put yourself in the position of a salesperson, and you're talking to a brand about expanding opportunities for print.
Sure.
And let's sit in that role for a second. How much more powerful is it when you're able to speak to the client's full funnel, understanding the different media channels, where digital plays in the funnel, the top of funnel awareness, the bottom of funnel conversion, where the challenges right now in the cookieless based world, basically the destruction of the targeting ability that iOS, Apple Intelligent Tracking Prevention's brought along. When you're able to intelligently talk about print and the different forms of print and how that can fit in to offset what the client has experienced during COVID, clients in some of the competitive categories had keywords jump up to 180% in terms of cost.
Yeah.
And, you don't hear that talked a lot about unless you were at the client, and then they were talking a whole lot about it.
Yeah.
And Prince had a ton of price increases, but it hasn't been 180%, and it didn't happen overnight.
Correct.
So we forget some of these things that happen on the digital side. And, when you can lovingly and sweetly talk about digital and knowing its place and where it fits in the funnel, you realize it does play a very, very, very valuable role.
Vital role.
But guess what? Here's where print can set in, and the two of them together, 1 + 1 = 3. It's so much more powerful, and you make such a strong impression, and you're not that antagonizing voice in front of that brand that's doing an us versus them. It's so much more powerful. But the only way to unlock that is education and to stay on top of some of these case studies. We do them all the time.
Yeah.
And shame on us. We don't always, think to help others understand how to interpret those. But, that's why why it's so much more powerful to be in that sort of position and to understand, what's exactly happening on the digital side for those people.
Agreed.
I think some of that happens though, Tim. I mean, just looking at some of the businesses we work with, is that their marketing department structure also, from a corporate structure standpoint, doesn't lend itself to this really truly multi-channel world, right? So I was listening to a podcast, and I'm forgetting which one now, but they were talking about these
Probably
structures.
Millennials in print. Probably.
Probably.
It probably was.
Shameless plug.
Actually, it was in a very, it was actually in a very different context. But the key element there was that if you analyze your digital financials based on old direct mail metrics, your digital financials aren't going to work, right? And if you analyze, if the flip is true, right? If you analyze your direct mail financials on digital only metrics, that doesn't work either, right? So you have to have this framework, and you have to have a structure in your organization for, one, managing all these programs, and two, then financially reporting what's actually happening. And I think part of the problem that we're seeing is that the marketing people may get it, but the financial operations within the organization don't support it, right? And so you still get this battle because financially the CMO still has to report to a CFO and a president and a board that still looking at their numbers in a very isolated way, whether they're digital first or they're direct mail first. So I think that's one of the problems that we have to structurally overcome in the industry.
So I have a question on that though, right? So when you're looking, and you guys are obviously well versed at, okay, we're going to take someone and we're going to set them up with the framework and attribution and things like that. Are you going high? Like, I guess, because a lot of times what I get on the print side is to say like, okay, our digital is X amount, we're going to spend X amount on print, and then that's like set, and then that's the whole year, and there's no, right. And then they're going to say, okay, well, we have, we're going to do whatever we can to hit the X, the 100,000 that our budget is, because if we don't use it, then we're going to lose it, kind of thing. So when you guys look at it, are you guys looking at it as like higher up to say, okay, our cost of acquisition is X, right, across all channels? Or are you diving into each one? Like, how are you thinking about that sort of, like, you're calling it a framework? Is it like you're just going high enough up, or you're going into each channel and then rolling it up? Like, how are you guys looking at it?
As detailed as possible in each channel to pull all costs together so you know exactly what you're spending in each channel. That's the first thing. You have to pull in the cost. You can't make any broad-based assumptions. The reason that most clients are in the condition they're in is because they've made broad-based assumptions. So you've got to get down to exactly what you're spending in each channel. And then the hard work begins, because then you have to begin setting up the test to determine what the organic percentages are. When we figure this out, and we do measurement, and whether it's just a traditional campaign measurement or we're doing lifetime value, everything is incremental. Everything is above and beyond. We don't report on gross revenues, because that's how brands have gotten into the problem.
Yeah,
the last
exactly.
Attribution.
Exactly.
So we will establish what those percentages are. So we know, as an example, what a Google shopping feed can provide and sustain on its own. We know what that's like when other channels are interacting with it, including print. And then we can begin to measure that. It takes some time to measure. These are things that you have to measure and get right. But once you do, and you have that true lifetime value, then you begin to really shift the way that you have $1 left to spend. Where are you going to spend it? Well, you know exactly where you're going to spend it, because you know exactly what that return is. And you also know where you can get quick hits. But the quick hits may not be the best lifetime value. So you've got to balance that. But you have to have total and complete mastery over all the cost, understanding what your organic percentages are by channel, and the incremental lift and incremental contribution you make off of all those channels.
And you're just doing that through testing, essentially, right? And then obviously we set it up in a
database environment. So it's a very sophisticated data environment in order to do it. To do that, to pull in those feeds, everything has to be sort of crunched. Even if you aren't operating in a database environment, we will set one up for you for the lifetime value, because there's really no other way
to do it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, well, I don't know if there's no other way to do it, but I would say there's no better way to do it with today's tools. But I think Tim's hitting on a really, really important point that I think everybody needs to understand. These data projects are really, really important. And you've got to get a handle on your systems data, right? Because we got lots of different data sources pouring in to these types of attribution models and database environments. And that data is often very messy. We've been working with a client now for about 2.5 years on cleaning up their data environment just to get this type of picture that Tim's alluding to. And they had a big mess. They had acquired a bunch of different businesses. They finally got them on a different platform, but they moved them onto the platform all at different times. So there's historical data that's still in old formats. And that's just one set of systems. That's not even including the other set of systems that are over on the digital side. So it is not to scare anybody away from it, but you need to start the hard work of organizing that data in order to get to what Tim's talking about. And fortunately there's companies out there that will help, and CohereOne is definitely one of those companies that will help you get that process started.
I think in everything that you guys have said, there's been two really kind of key points I think that we've briefly discussed but not gone deep enough on that I'd like to talk about. One of them being attribution. I'll let you guys and Jake talk about that one. But I think the privacy stuff that's going on right now is really important. And I'm curious what conversations you guys are having with some of your clients right now. What are their concerns and the questions they're asking about it right now, and what we should know about it?
Oh,
where to start, right?
Yeah. I was just thinking.
The history of social media. No,
yeah.
A brief interlude.
Is this on?
There you go.
74.
There
Yeah,
you go.
Exactly. No, so let's talk privacy just for a second, because it's what's spinning up in my head at the moment. I can't tell you. Obviously, chairing this privacy committee in Washington, you have to be very, very close to this.
Yeah.
And I'm getting updates now. I think Connecticut is next. I think I think one I got was from Connecticut. Everyone's still kind of has their eyes really corely focused on Sacramento. The California Privacy Rights Act, which is now going to really amend and supersede the California Consumer Privacy Act. And I think the thing that's important to remember about these acts is, yes, there's a lot of legislation that's coming out, vast majority of which has not been decided on the court, in the courts. There will be some things that I think will not be decided in the courts. I think some things that the attorney generals are setting up, such as customer experience, that the court is uniquely not built to rule on. It is a very subjective subject, and those are the types of things that I think it's just sort of the whim of an attorney general. But the important thing right now is that when GDPR out of the European Union came out, it really established the baseline for understanding where and when you receive, and by what method you received permission to market to somebody. And that really set in motion this importance of tracking this information, being able to answer intelligently a customer inquiry or a prospect inquiry, and how did you get my information? Questions such as the right to be forgotten, the right to amend, data that may be incorrect, or to suppress, data. So all of that has existed. And the interesting thing is all of that has existed on the print side for some time. Yeah. You think about, people who are mailing and they're put in the screamer file, right? Oh my gosh, this lady never wants to receive a catalog again.
Do not mail.
So, do not mail. We're putting
Here's your link.
We call it a screamer file because it's like, this is the one that, cooperative databases, list rental companies, everybody has to get around through this. Yeah. It's sort of like a pander file that, I don't wish everybody would use, but yeah. So there's a lot of that framework within the print world has existed. And so there's not really a lot of adaptation in the print channels other than, some of the mechanisms that you need to post online on your site to dial back, or to inform someone of how to not sell the information. It really is largely, and these privacy laws are, the context of these privacy laws are digital in focus. They're here, they're established because in the digital landscape, it was really a wild west. There wasn't any laws on the books. There was a lot of things that were permissible. People in general just don't know how often and to what degree their information was shared. There have been some headlines, and some of them are sort of 1984-ish in terms of what information was being shared without someone's knowledge, including in some cases diagnosis, that were then being fed to as a file augmentation into insurance companies for prospecting purposes. So there's some real scary stuff that's going on.
Yeah.
The landscape, the biggest impact I think for brands obviously is got to be the compliance. You're going to have to make sure that you're staying compliant. Until we get the federal privacy legislation passed and on the president's desk. They said postal would never get done. We wrapped up postal. That's been signed, now delivered. So now it's, privacy has there's more broad agreement on the privacy landscape issue. There's the difference between the Republican and Democratic proposals are much closer than they are in a lot of other types of proposals that go through Congress. So we're making a lot of headway, and it's important that we keep focused. I think the biggest impact really, though, is what's happening on the landscape of targeting.
Yeah.
And the efficacy of digital advertising to zero in and target on behaviors that they had 100% visibility to in the past, that they've lost that visibility. When you guys were on our show, we talked a little bit about, Facebook and the $10 billion breakup with brands that was published in the Wall Street Journal. Well, it's only gotten worse. Since I was talking to a colleague, and he just said their Facebook sales that they really depended on, built the business on, is operating at 10% of what it was, just cratered. And so they're trying to figure out a way to build it back up. But that targeting ability, they'll come up with some other options to zero in a little bit better on the targeting, but it's never going to be what it was.
Yeah.
Because I knew exactly what Jake was clicking on. I knew exactly what Jake was potentially carding or not carding. And then that was basically available in the open market. That's not available anymore. So that's going to have tremendous implications. Erik, what do you think? You've been awfully quiet over there.
I'm just in awe of all your knowledge, Tim.
Oh, please give me a break.
He's enjoying the sunset. What do you mean?
I'm enjoying the sunset.
Yeah.
No, Tim's absolutely right. Privacy is a major concern. I've been listening to the Marketing School podcast with Neil Patel and Eric Shu, and these guys are agency guys who built some pretty sophisticated businesses in the digital world. And one of the things that they've been talking a lot about lately is how this privacy component and how the consumer is now poised to take complete control of their own experiences. And that they call it Web 3.0, right? Web 1 was what it was back in the early 2000s. Web 2.0 was kind of this shift towards big advertisers and doing all the things that Tim just described, right? And Web 3 is actually putting the power back into the user. And one of the tools and technologies that's doing that is the blockchain. And I'm like, my brain just exploded as I listened to some of these conversations about blockchain and decentralized autonomous organizations. I'm like, what the heck is that, right? But there's this movement that's going to gain momentum as all these laws get passed, that the blockchain and some of these new technologies are going to allow each of us to have individual control of our experience and engagement with specific brands. We will be able to basically turn on and turn off whether we want to engage with a brand. So what's the real implication there? The privacy thing is just going to be the driver, right? The reality is that the brands have to do a better job of being original, creative, authentic, and invested in their audience. And that's regardless of what technologies develop or emerge over the next few years, what legislation gets passed. If you are doing those things today, that's a best practice within your organization, then you're going to be well poised to adapt to the future. Otherwise, you won't be.
Yeah, and brands are looking for safe harbor for those dollars. When you're putting that money into Facebook and you're getting a percentage of what you used to get, you're not putting the same amount into Facebook. And so they're looking for other channels. Some have tried OTT. OTT was a big test area, and that's the basically where you're using like streaming services and you're targeting television ads to people. And honestly, they weren't seeing a ton of response, and so the response from some of the OTT tests was pretty dismal. And so brands are in experimentation mode, and they are looking for safe harbors. They need to find the places where they know they're going to get a return on those dollars. So it sort of shakes things up. And I know you mentioned attribution, and and at the same time brands are trying to figure this out, they're also trying to figure out that, like the last example I have, if you have a buck, where am I going to spend it? Yeah. Where am I going to spend it? And I go back again to say, attribution is one of those things. I've spent a lot of time on the digital side, and I have got a lot of friends on the digital side that each of them have their own unique view of attribution. Yeah. And one of my buddies, he's fantastic. He'll always be just a tremendous friend, but we argue tooth and nail, if we're at a bar or something like that and we're together, and he'll like, no, I have the way, I have the right way to do attribution. Like, oh my God, not again. Like, bartender, hit me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason being is, at the end of the day, on attribution, follow the money. Follow the money. A lot of times when people are getting into conversations about attribution and they're trying to prove their point, they're selling something. They're selling a piece of software that they believe is going to figure out the attribution. At the end of the day, it's just like the lifetime value. You have to understand the cost going into every single channel. You have to understand the organic percentage of business you're going to get in a channel. And then you have to understand the incremental lift, both in revenue and contribution, dollars in the bank, by each channel, and the interoperability or the interplay between, print. How does print affect non-branded key terms? How does print affect branded key terms? What effect does email have on the mix? When you get into Google Shopping, what does that look like? Where do affiliates play? All of that, you have to establish all that. If you're doing that, you're going to come out with a solid lifetime value, and you're going to have a pretty good identification of where the dollars are going to come from. And if you're not chasing the toxic soup that's attribution, but you're chasing where's the best return for my money, you're going to be in a much, much, much better place. And you can get off the hamster wheel of attribution. It is a hamster wheel, and it's something that everybody has an opinion on. But at the end of the day, you need to find out where your return is coming from. Answer that question first. Don't go all sexy with attribution. Figure out, where the hell your money's coming from.
I'm in complete agreement with Tim. There's a MarTech report. There's an article, in chiefmartech.com. This was 2016. And the article is titled, Analytics CEO Makes a Passionate Case Against Marketing Attribution. And if people just take, I'll send you a link so you can put it in your show notes.
Yeah.
It says exactly what Tim just said. This particular CEO says exactly the same thing. Understand your return on investment, make intelligent decisions, do some testing, right? Those are the things that really matter, because the problem with attribution in today's world, it's still a set of assumptions. Whatever lens you look at it through dictates the outcome. So if you're not looking at it through multiple lenses, and you only have that one view, that one perspective, you're going to get the answer you want. I want to spend money in direct mail, or I want to spend money in paid search. If that's what you want, your attribution is going to be set up to support that case.
Yeah.
And
100%.
Know what you're trying to accomplish.
That's a big one.
If you, for example, if you're, and this is something where, again, it's not one of those popular things, but there may be something that if you're trying to introduce a prospect into a brand, you know what? Catalog is a better format for that than a solo direct mail piece. Testing will bear it out every single time. So understand that even within print, you need to understand the format and the response vehicle.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think on the digital equivalent of that is landing somebody on a product page versus a category page.
Yeah. Good
Category
example.
page outperforms the product page enormously. Now there's tools you can do to make your product pages more effective, but same thing Tim just said, know where you need to get your people, get your audience to go in order to maximize your opportunities.
Awesome.
It's been a great
Silence
conversation,
moment.
guys.
Awesome.
I think we're just letting
Just
it all
processing.
sink
Processing.
in. We're allowing the audience some time to just let it all sink into.
Let them pull over the side of the road and really think about it. Yeah.
The
Like
side
my
of the
headphones
freeway.
are smoking. I let the air out of my headphones.
That's kind of the world, it's kind of the world we live in. You think about, the headlines, and I think, just talk print for a second. It's,
Sure.
The number of brands that are scrambling to try to launch print, and there's no real accounting for the brands that are sitting on the sidelines because they couldn't get press time or they couldn't get paper.
Correct.
So the only reporting that comes back is typically what, the Postal Service will see as injection into the mail stream.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not really a good measurement because there's so many
Correct.
players on the sideline.
Correct.
And people are somewhat surprised at the degree to which people are bounding. But, in some of these CEO and CMO forums, a lot of where people are reaching out to us is, hey, we're being told that we need to launch a catalog. One of the funniest comments came from a CEO. He had been in the business. He's a seasoned CEO. I think he said he's been in the business about 40 years. So he's certainly given his time.
Sure.
And he says, I can't believe what I'm being told. And I had to look at my calendar to see what year it was, because I was being told I desperately need to have print and a catalog format in the mix in order to really make the brand successful. And he said, I haven't heard that in 30 years from anybody. Yeah. And so sure enough, but it does seem sort of anachronistic when you think about it, but the reality is these guys are under incredible pressure. The venture capitalists are saying you have to continue to grow. And guess what? They can't grow anymore spending what they were spending in the digital realm. They just can't do it. It's not an unlimited return. There is a point of spend where you hit diminishing returns, and some of these brands are hitting it, but they're still under pressure to grow.
Yeah. I think one of the other things, not even just an injection, but how many people are currently printing that we can't accommodate their growth.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's another
Great
part
point.
Of it, right?
Yeah.
So you could look at it and say, okay, there's probably another 25 to 30% of people that would increase, but there's, capacity constraints.
I've got a lot of brands, and I mean a lot of brands that would be printing between 50 to 100% more than they would be, because their growth and their return can sustain it.
Correct.
Even in this environment.
Yeah.
But they can't get the resources to do it.
And so I think when you combine that as well as the people that aren't, it would be an interesting metric to really know, right.
Like we talked about earlier before the show, when you're struggling to get enough staff to run a third shift and you can't run the third shift, those people are sitting on the sidelines because you can't run it, and then you may not even have paper for it.
Yeah.
So it's real. It's a better problem to have than no demand. I'll take that.
I'll take
balance is what I would take.
Balance
Alex,
would be great
for 1,500, but I don't get that. I don't get that option anymore.
Well, and this will settle out, right? We're in a really unique time. So everybody's tired of hearing the word pandemic, but it is pandemic driven, right? And our responses to the pandemic that has caused some of this, right? This will play out, right? This is not a forever situation.
Yeah, play out like a kidney stone, but it's going to play out.
Hey, in one way or another, it's going to resolve itself, right?
Yeah.
This too shall pass.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
And so everybody needs to, take a pause and say, put the fires of the way, push them aside for a moment, because yes, it's struggle to get paper. Postage is going up. The distribution chain, the channels of distribution are still a mess, right?
Yeah.
Freight's skyrocketing. Prices are increasing at the fastest pace than they have in 30 years. All those things are true. But there have been moments in time in history where all those things have been true too. Right? And we survived them. And the key to surviving them is just have a plan. Keep working towards your goals. And I think that if you take that longer view than the short term, yeah, you're going to have to be nimble and make adjustments. But if you keep that long-term view in front of you, you will reach that destination. Yeah, there'll be some twists and turns along the way.
Yeah, it's interesting how, we view the pandemic a little bit now. We talk about how the world was put on pause, but it essentially accelerated everything too. It accelerated demand a few years ahead. It accelerated companies taking advantage of more technology and things like that too. I think it's just an interesting view to look at now, 2+ years later, on what the effects ultimately were, the ripple effect of COVID.
Yeah, here we are.
Absolutely.
Well, honestly, guys, I think, Jake, if you have anything else, I kind of got all my questions in. We usually kick it to you guys towards the end of the show. If you had anything else that you wanted to kind of talk about, discuss, something we might have missed, any final thoughts from you guys?
No, nothing I think that's been missed. The only thing I would say is that, the acceleration that you talked about, I think we'll continue to see it for the next 2 years at the current pace. So it'll be interesting to see if any of these prognostications in terms of, resolution of the print markets, targeting within the digital space, where we're sitting 2 years from now. Be interesting to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything that's really, really crazy. I just say keep your eye on the ball. This will settle down, and if you stick to your goals, you're going to have a better result than if you try to react to every fire.
No, that's a great point, guys. Well, I appreciate you guys' time. I appreciate our audience at home tuning in. Thank you guys for joining.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us. We really enjoyed
guys.
it. All
Can't
right,
wait till
take
part
care.
3 when we're either on your podcast or you're back on
Yeah,
ours.
exactly.
Sounds good.
Thanks
All
again,
right,
guys.
see you guys.
All right, bye.